Hi, I'm Tony Snelling,
And I'm Michelle Snelling.
and we're here to talk about a journey I had about 10 years ago and how it has affected our family and the things that we've had to deal with. Back in 2013, I started having what I considered to be exertion issues, climbing stairs, carrying stuff, and I would get lightheaded, but I just thought I was old and fat and out of shape, which all three were true. But it got to the point to where it was happening more and more often. So I went to the doctor and did an EKG, which was inconclusive, but I had a very large heart murmur. So the doctor said, this is a Friday evening. Doctor says, I don't want you to go home. I want you to stay. Nothing's going to happen over the weekend. Monday we're going to come in, we're going to do some tests, and send you home and see how it goes. Michelle came in from work, spent the night. First thing Saturday morning, a lady opened the door with a big machine, and this guy comes in and says, hi, I'm your cardiologist, and we're here to do a test. Which, that's how they found out I had my aortic valve had calcified shut, which apparently is not totally uncommon. And he says it's no big deal. It's like a walk in the park. You'd be in the hospital for a week, be at home for a month, and you go back to do your rest of your life. So that was Saturday morning. Throughout the week coming up, I did a couple more tests, and they scheduled the surgery for Thursday morning, the 23rd. I went in for surgery that morning, and then she's going to have to talk for a while because I don't have any recollection of what happened.
So first of all, to clarify, he never told me he was having episodes. I had no idea this was happening. And we're coming home from dinner on a Friday night, and he tells me he had one that morning. And I'm like, okay, we're turning around. We're going to the hospital. And he's like, no, I've already
You
made
ever
an
been to the
appointment.
emergency room on a Friday night? You will be there forever.
Okay, so he wouldn't let me go to the emergency room, right? Okay, so he had an appointment. So he does this. We go to the hospital, and remind everybody, in case you don't know our family, at that time we had 3 teenage boys at home. I had a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 13-year-old at home. So when we went in Friday night, we were like, oh, okay, it's going to be we get a weekend away. Mom was coming over to take care of the kids. We were just going to hang out at the hospital all weekend, be home Monday. Okay, well then when they came in Saturday morning and told us about the walk in the park we were going to get to take, I was like, oh, okay, open heart surgery. That was not what we were thinking. So we had to call everybody and make all the arrangements and all that kind of stuff. And I was working at the time. So we got all that worked out to where I could work at home, or work at the hospital. And Thursday morning rolls around. They came and took him about 5:30. And so I'm in the waiting room, and different family members were there, and a couple of the ministers from church had come in that morning early, and we were waiting, and the surgery was supposed to have taken about 3 or 4 hours. So we're sitting there, and they had started, and it was going. They had started at 7, and at 10 o'clock, of course, I start looking at my watch, and I'm like, okay, it should be any time. And about 10:30, I get a phone call, and they said, hey, everything went well. We're closing him up, and you'll be able to come back into the ICU room fairly soon. Okay. So I gave everybody that message, and then it was like an hour later, hour and a half later, and nothing. And so I'm like, somebody call me. Well, we didn't get a phone call, but we got a nurse coming flying down the hallway, and she comes and she says, Miss Snelling, I need you to come with me. And I was like, okay. And I said, just me? And she said, who else? And I said, his mom's here. So I took Judy with me, and we went back to the back in the ICU room, and they set us down in there. And then they told us that he had coded 4 times after they got him out of the operating room. And in between the hallway, it's actually in the hallway when he was coding, and he coded 4 times. And they had gotten him back, and they had to, while he was in the ICU room, they had to put a balloon underneath his heart that was actually pumping for his heart. So, okay. And the doctor told me, he looked at me and he said, "Miss Snelling," he said, "your husband wouldn't have been here another month had we not done this surgery." And he said how he was walking around was beyond him. His heart was so sick and had been that sick for a while, and it was so enlarged, and the muscle itself was rigid because it was so sick. So he warned me that it was going to be touch and go, but we got to go back and we got to see him. There were machines everywhere. So, but he made it through there. So all day, the rest of the day on Thursday, we were just all in the waiting room, just waiting. And finally, Thursday night, the nurse that had been there since 7 o'clock that morning had come and told me that, she said, "Miss Snelling, you can't stay here. They won't let you." And she said, "I promise you I wasn't going to leave until I felt certain that he was going to be here in the morning." And so she sent me home. And I remember driving home that night thinking, thank you, Jesus, that I do not have to tell my boys that their dad's not with us. And, so we got home that night and I stayed with the boys. Friday morning, we got up in there, back up in the hospital, and they were supposed to have taken the ventilator. They were going to try to take him off of the ventilator. They couldn't get him off of the ventilator. So they kept that all Friday morning. And then Friday morning, he was groaning and moaning. That's all we could hear was groaning and moaning, but we couldn't get him to wake up. And he was supposed to be awake. And they could not get him to wake up. Friday afternoon, they were finally able to take the ventilator off, but he still was not coherent. He was very out of it and just lots of moaning and groaning. What we didn't know was happening was his liver and his kidneys were failing. And so it was all of the toxins that were building up in his brain, and he just literally couldn't get out of the fog. He couldn't wake up. So Friday night, everybody had gone home. There's a couple hour period there where you can't go into the ICU, and we had all eaten there at the hospital, and everybody else had gone home. I was just going to go in, check on him one more time, then go home and check on the boys. Well, I get in there at 8, and there's 5 doctors standing there, and I'm like, oh, this can't be good. And sure enough, it was the nephrologist, and he told me that Tony's kidneys had failed and that they had to start dialysis. Problem is, he had 15 bags hooked to him, and they could not move him, so they were having to bring in a portable dialysis machine. The other problem with that is he had no veins or arteries left. Everything had something in it. So they had to go in through his neck to get the port for the dialysis. So I had to sign all this paperwork, which is very scary. I got all that paperwork signed. They got the procedure done, and about midnight they were able to get the dialysis machine hooked up. But it kept, every time he would move, because of where it was, every time he would move, the dialysis machine would quit, and they'd have to get it hooked back up completely. So it was about midnight that night, and a friend of mine, out of the blue, another friend of ours from Northside, she called, and she had just been thinking about me, and she said, I told her what was going on. She happened to be a nurse, and she came up to the hospital and sat with me for a little while and brought me a pillow and a blanket so I could at least lay on the couch there in the waiting room. And so I did that the rest of the night, Friday night, and then Saturday morning, I woke up and went into the ICU room, and Judy was there, and I walked in there, and the nurses caught me, or one of the nurses caught me, and I said, okay, what's the update? And she said, Mrs. Snelling, she said, his liver's not working either. And she said, I said, what do I do? I said, what do I do? And she said, you need to call your boys and they need to get up here. I said, okay. So I went in the room and Judy was there, and I couldn't tell her what the nurse just told me. I just couldn't do it to her. So we stayed in there as long as I could, and then Judy stayed, and I left the room and went and called the boys and called my mom, and I called his brother. Terry had been my rock through that whole ordeal, and I called him and I told him. And so then as I was coming down the hallway and going into the waiting room to try to gather myself, of all the people to be there was Sandra McWilliams. And she had brought me a big bag of bagels and cream cheese and all kinds of stuff, the thing that Sandra typically does. And I just started bawling, and she was asking me what happened, and I was telling her what the nurse told me, and I said, they don't think he's going to make it. And so she helped me get myself back together, and my mom was calling, my sister was calling. We were trying to figure out what are we going to do, and who's coming where, and who's getting the boys, and because Colton was at work. And so we got all that figured out, and it couldn't have been more than a couple of hours, not even that long, I don't think. But by the time I came out of that ICU room, of course my boys had gotten there, and my family was there, Judy and Terry, and we had family in the room. But when we came out of the room, as the doctor needed to talk to me and wanted to give me the scenario of what all was going on, so Colton and I were going to go in there. And when we walked out the door, it was a long hallway, you guys, a long hallway, and it was filled with people. It was filled with our small group. It was filled with our old small group. It was filled with every elder was there, ministers, friends. Both sides of the hallway were full. So that when Colton and I...
Pause right there. Hold where you're at.
Tissue?
I know we have clips. Okay, oh, you have some.
I brought one.
I just wanted
We
to-
have some extra over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me have that though,
I
because
just
this
wanted
is
to put it someplace where
Yeah.
it looked like we
I-
had it there. Because if a box of clinics shows up, it's going to be
Okay.
All right, so,
Where was I? I don't even remember.
The hallways were
Oh.
filled with people,
yeah.
and I think that's really good that you're talking about that component of the church community. So yeah.
Go ahead.
So when Colton and I walked down the hallway to talk to the doctors, all of those people were there, and all of those people were praying, because if you've ever been in that situation, or at least for me, I didn't know how to pray. I wasn't really sure what to pray. The words, I couldn't get the words, and I'm sure shock was part of it, but they were all praying for us. They were standing in for us. He obviously couldn't pray, and I didn't have the wherewithal to pray. And that hallway full of people was praying. So Colton and I go in there Saturday afternoon, and they explained everything to me. They explained the numbers, because I had to know the details. Tell me what's going on. What are we fighting? What do we need to do? And they gave me all the details, and they gave me the numbers. And they said the next 24, 48 hours are going to be the biggest obstacle. And they asked if the boys were there, and they wanted the boys to come in and see Tony. And so that was Saturday night. And Sunday morning, we had here at the church the worship team, because Tony was a longtime member of the worship team. And so they actually stopped service Sunday morning, and the whole worship team was down front. The whole front was covered with people praying for us, praying for Tony, praying for me, praying for the 3 boys. And they had that on video, and so I got to watch that Sunday morning. All day Sunday, still nothing. I had the moaning and groaning was really hard, but the silence was even harder. There was nothing. No movement, nothing, and it was just silent. And so Sunday night, the numbers were still astronomical. But Monday morning, we got up and went down there, and Monday morning, the numbers had actually improved. So he was still not awake. Nothing, the liver and the kidneys were apparently not, they were still not working, but everything they were doing to get all of the toxins out of his body was working. So the numbers were better. And I asked him where the numbers needed to be, and they told me. And so every time they checked blood, I was, okay, where are the numbers? Give me the numbers. Every 6 hours, give me the numbers. And I was watching them just slowly go down. And I could breathe a little easier, but he still wasn't awake. So Monday afternoon, one of the ministers was there, and the doctor came in, and it was the cardiologist. And he said that, you know what? He said, I really see no reason why the rest of his organs, aren't waking up. He said, I really think they will. And I was like, okay, cool. That was the first good news we'd had since Thursday. But then Monday evening rolled around, and the neurologist came in. And they were really concerned about his brain, because of how many times that he had coded, and the fact that he was still unconscious. They were really concerned about his brain. And so I was like, oh, great. Okay. So Tuesday, and I'm working from the hospital, and the boys, I'm going home late at night and then coming back the next morning. You guys, the boys never missed a meal. The church had a meal train going on, and my boys had something different to eat every night.
They loved it.
They loved it. They absolutely loved it, because it was somebody's cooking besides Mom's, and they never knew what they were going to get. It was a surprise, and they absolutely loved it. But nothing on Tuesday. It was still another silence day. Wednesday came around, and Terry was getting kind of nervous. We both were, because it had been almost a week. And I hadn't said anything to him, but we finally kind of talked about it together that, we just need him. We need him to wake up. We need him to say something. We need him. It's like, I know. And Wednesday night, Terry had stayed with me, and we had eaten dinner, and I went back in. I said, okay, I'm going to go in and I'll check on him first, and then I'll come get you. And Wednesday night, I walked around the corner of the ICU room, and I had 3 nurses, Miss Snelling, get in here. He woke up. And I just started bawling, and I was shaking, literally shaking. And I said, he did what? What? I dropped everything I had, because you have everything that you own with you. And I go in there, and his nurse, our favorite nurse, was there, and he said he woke up. He said he knows his name is Tony. I couldn't get him to say anything else. He knows his name is Tony, and he knew his birth date was January 24th. And I was like, I could not believe it. And he was back asleep. We couldn't get him back awake, but I ran and got Terry. Terry came back, and Terry was trying to wake him up. And the nurse said, is this your brother, Terry? And Tony shook his head. And I was like, oh my goodness. So that was Thursday night. I ran out and called the boys real fast. I stayed there Thursday night, of course, just in case he happened to wake up again, which he didn't. But Friday morning he woke up, and I got to see his eyes. And he woke up Friday morning. They went ahead and took him off of the BiPAP and just had him on regular oxygen so that he could talk a little bit. And then he was just kind of thirsty. He was thirsty, and they would let me give him 1 ice chip an hour. So that was kind of torturous. but he still really wasn't talking much. And then as the day progressed on Friday, he would be a little more awake every once in a while. But then Friday night, I went ahead and went home and checked on the boys and stayed with the boys. Saturday morning, I went back to the hospital early that morning, and I walked around the corner, and they had the bed lifted up. They had the bed sitting up, and he was sitting up in the bed. And I remember very vividly, I literally fell to my knees that morning, and I knew that morning what we were supposed to do. I knew that morning that we were supposed to tell people the story. But I still wasn't sure how the story was going to end up exactly. So Saturday morning, he was sitting up, and I mean, it was a miracle. And the first question he asked me was, how'd it go?
As far as I'm concerned, that was yesterday.
Yeah, he thought it was just like yesterday. And I was like, it went good. Little hiccup here or there, but it went okay. I didn't know what to tell him. And so it wasn't until Saturday night the nurses finally told him what happened and what day it was and all this kind of stuff. Because I could not tell him, and the nurses did. And so Sunday, he looked at me and he said, "Did you see Dad?" No, his dad's been dead for years. And he said, "Yeah," he said, "Dad and I were walking around on the Batfish. Well, I don't even know what it was.
It's a Muskogee, it's a submarine.
It's a submarine." And he said, "Yeah, Dad and I were walking around on the Batfish." Oh, okay. No, baby, I didn't see him. Okay, this was what he was asking me on Saturday. Okay. And then Friday night, he had pulled they had IV nutrition down his throat, and he had pulled it out. So great. And the nurse called, and he said, "We tried to put it in 3 times, and he keeps fighting us." And I said, "I'll be right there, and I'll try to get him, if I can get him to eat, if I can get something down him, that we have to put it in." He said, "No." Okay. So I told Tony, I said, "Dude, we got to do this. If not, that tube's going back down your nose." So Saturday, they brought us broth and stuff, and we tried to get some nutrition in him, and that worked. Sunday, we stayed. We were in the ICU 11 days. So we got out on Tuesday and moved to the regular floor. But before we moved, after he woke up on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, I can't tell you how many people we had come by that weren't even doctors and nurses coming by, that just wanted to meet Tony because he was a miracle. And I had nurses and doctors, multiple nurses and doctors, tell us that there was no medical reason he was still alive. And I mean, we had nurses from other floors coming by, doctors coming by. "Hey, Mr. Snelling, I just wanted to come by and introduce myself. Hi, how are you?" That kind of thing. So we move out to the regular floor on Tuesday, and then.
So from that point, we're more or less convalescing, I guess, until time to go home. And at some point in there, my hands started turning colors. And they couldn't figure out what was going on. They were doing Doppler things and all kinds of stuff. One doctor came in and said, "I'm going to have to cut my hand off."
I threw a fit.
She came unglued. So I decided to try something else first. So we go into surgery, and they found a blood clot the entire length of my forearm. And they couldn't shoot it because they didn't want it to go through my new heart valve. So they slit on my wrist and at my elbow, and they pulled as much of it they could out of one direction and went the other way and pulled of it out, and the rest of it they shot out the other end of it. So there's surgery number 2. The rest of the, one of the other things, when you're completely immobile for weeks, your muscle atrophy is incredible. There's just nothing there. So having to, I won't say learn to walk again, but having to learn to get the muscle to do what you're supposed to took a long time. I couldn't stand on my own for probably a week. Couldn't get out of bed, actually. Had to have help getting out of bed. And my mom would push a chair behind me as we would try to walk down the hall, so in case I could sit down at the blink of an eye. But we go through all that, get out of the hospital. I went home with 14 prescriptions and my finger's dying. This had started when I was in the hospital. It's comparable to frostbite. And the surgeon said that he wanted to see if they would auto amputate, which means they just close themselves off and the bad part just falls off. Could be in the bed, which she threw a fit. He said, just don't let the dog get it. I'm just,
Yeah, I was like, that is not happening on my watch.
I wanted to cut them off and keep them and put them in the candy bowl at Halloween. Let the kids reach in there and grab them. But anyway, they wouldn't do what they wanted them to do, so we had to schedule surgery to do that. So I lost this here, and then I also lost part of 3 toes on my left foot. And that's about the most of it medical-wise.
But we were in there for 40 days and 40 nights. We didn't realize that until the nurse was leaving it and was checking us out that day. And they said, you realize you'd been there 40 days and 40 nights? And I was like, well, I don't know about Noah, but I'm ready to go home. So we went home, and every night for 40 days, our kids got fed. And even after we got home, we were still getting fed. I had people that were offering to take him to and from, because he had all kinds of appointments, and people were offering to drive the boys. I had teenage boys, they were driving them. And yeah, so what our small group did, what the church family did, I wouldn't have made it without the support, without the help, without the prayers. And Tony definitely wouldn't have.
It was harder on her than it was me. You know, especially through the first part of it, because I remember nothing for a long time, actually. And even still today, she'll say something like, "Are you serious?" You know, I don't remember that at all. People that came and even came to our house, I don't remember it, but yeah. And my boss, I would have to give a lot of credit to my boss. I never missed a paycheck. He continued to pay me, and I told him, I said, I'll be on a box under the bridge out there if it hadn't been for you. So that part of it was, he was a very spiritual man, and he understood that if he dropped me, then I would drop out. So that part was really good.
God led us through the entire thing. And we see that. We saw it every day. It was hard to see some days. But then there were other days where it was so evident and so profound. And I know for a fact, and Tony and I have talked about it many different times, that we're supposed to be telling people that miracles do happen. And you can look at that man, and he is living proof of it. And so if anybody's sitting out there today and you don't believe in miracles, we're here to tell you they do happen. And prayers work.